Welcome. We are back with Danny Lamartina and another episode 3 of The Bro and the Brain. We promised you all axial loading to start, but I do want to talk about something real fast, and it just came to my brain. I'd sent you an Instagram reel where I said I want to rip out all of my hair and like jump into fire. Um,
I think you actually said that in the DM too.
yeah.
Like, not kidding.
Right. And I'll set this up for you guys. It was so Dr. Mike Israetel, which actually will lead into our axial loading conversation. He had a video where a young guy was breaking down his training, his back training, and he was just going through about how everything he was doing was wrong and how he should have his PhD revoked. And what's really interesting is I thought to myself, the science community is actually imploding on itself. Like
Mm,
now you're getting off of people like me, and you're actually attacking people in your own community who shouldn't you be leaning on to um, almost further each other's knowledge path or
yeah, like to
educate the
move the needle.
masses? And it creates a really weird dynamic for me, right? Because I, I watched the video and my instant instinct was, dear God, why would anyone listen to you? You're 165 pounds. Like,
Yeah, literally.
yeah, I'm not exaggerating. And and then I think to myself, okay, cool, like you speak well, you had a good edit on your video. And then it had, I can't remember, it had like almost 900 likes and a ton of comments, right? And I'm thinking to myself, so there's 900 other humans out there that like this content where you're just belittling another person on your side of the fence. And then when I actually look at what he's speaking about, I mean, he was talking about how ultra wide grip lat pull downs are for your low lats. And I said to you, I said, when has that ever been a low lat exercise? And I'll let you talk about that from a biomechanical standpoint. Am I wrong in that, or is wide grip lat pull downs ever going to work my low lats effectively?
I mean, could I sit here and spin my brain and find a way where maybe
Okay.
it might take me all day and I'd still probably be unsuccessful.
Okay.
So you're no.
Right. Because when I do wide grip lat pull downs, first of all, it feels terrible for my shoulder. My range of motion is hot garbage.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be honest, like, look, if I can't even get my hands down past there, and that's trying, maybe there. It's going to blow up my rear delts, and I'm going to feel like some fucking Terry's in there, no doubt in my mind.
Or
Um, but, and I think that kind of goes back to my early bodybuilding, right? As I remember reading and watching all the things that Arnold would post, and he's like, wide grip lat pull downs build wide lats. And I remember thinking, okay, cool, I have to do those. So I was doing them and doing them. I was horrible. They felt terrible, and I saw zero back development. For years I was doing that, right? And I'm like, dear God, like, why didn't I listen to my own body and think, oh, if I move do pull-ups from this grip, suddenly I can start to feel some
yeah.
lat working.
I think what's interesting too is if I'm remembering correctly, I'm trying to envision how he was doing the wide grip pull downs.
Hmm.
And to me, if I'm imagining this correctly,
Yeah.
he was wide, but for him to actually get to the end range position, he actually leaned into a way that put him more into a sagittal plane and then just kind of like skipped through the motion so that he was actually getting, he wasn't staying wide. He was doing some like bastardized version of getting lat because he wasn't staying in line of pull, and yet he was preaching strict line of pull. So, that's where I think most people who train don't have what's called like the relative motion or the ability of modes to move on each other to actually hit the movement they think they're hitting. And chances are, if you are not feeling a muscle you think you should feel, or you've been told you should feel in a movement like you were at the pull downs,
Yeah.
it might either be due to structural changes or it might be due to the fact that you've got tightness or restriction somewhere that's preventing bones from moving on each other so that muscles can lengthen so that you can shorten them. But yeah, this guy, like, it was one of those moments where I think you and I both having now like 2 decades plus of being in this, we probably wondered like, are we actually wrong? Like, did I miss something here? And that's so sad to me because we both actually have a track record of like, hi, how many sessions have you accrued over your life? How many people have you trained? I mean, between your own training and people you've worked with in person and people you've worked with online, how
Yep.
many sessions have you either been present for or seen video?
Right.
Probably more than, quite frankly, I think you've probably seen more than any other coach out there because of your level of detail.
Right.
So it just, it blows my mind that you and I are sitting here like, did we miss something? Like, is this kid actually right? No, no, no. He's a buck 65 and he's doing pull downs like this.
Right.
Of course,
Yes.
he's gonna get fucking funky.
And it just, it's, again, it goes back to, I think what you said in episode one, right? Where those negative hooks is what get attention.
Yeah,
And as opposed to, hey, like this man has literally pounds of muscle on you. What can we learn from it? Like, I I don't understand why you would intentionally shit on someone who is drastically more developed.
hmm,
And I realize, like, in their world, they're probably like, oh, well, it's either time, effort, and energy, or it's drugs. And
yeah.
you and I both know that a shot or swallowing a pill isn't going to get you 60 pounds of muscle. It's just
It'd be
not.
great if it did.
Yeah, no shit.
Well, I think what's important for consumers too, and I think that what you and I would hope anyone who's listening to this actually takes away is that um to be able to step back and consume content instead of being told and like just receiving, hear that content as dialogue. So
Yes.
like you're ready to like mentally engage with it. Okay, well, why is that? Does this person have a record that supports that? If he does, okay, were there other circumstances that maybe like potentiated that? I filmed a loom last night to one of my clients talking about being a good consumer, right?
All right.
Because
Yeah.
as much as we can be good content creators, I think being a good consumer is really going to be the thing that allows someone to succeed in the sport, and be able to actually enjoy the endeavor. Because you're never going to enjoy something if every time you turn around, you're told you're wrong and how you're doing it.
Great. Yep.
And so there were a couple things that I said, and one was that as you're consuming, as soon as you hear something that is a negative hook, I think that should be an instant like filter to be like, okay, they have an agenda here. What's their position? Who's their audience? What's their circumstance? And being able to take away the hook and just look at the information at face value is something is really, really important. And something that should be very empowering.
Yes. You know, years ago, I learned this lesson because I always did a great job, I felt like, of just observing what I would consider like the gym jungle. It's like look around, see who's developed or developing at a fast rate and watch how they're getting there. And
Yeah.
as I think I said to you in the first one, is even though it's not maybe the way I would have done it, it's not wrong.
Right,
You know?
right.
Um, before we hit record, you and I were talking about how shoulder pressing is incredible for you, and it wasn't for me. On the outside in, if you had a very jaded perspective of what I would consider like a know-it-all attitude, you may watch me training shoulders and be like, the dude's a fucking moron. Like, you know how much bigger he could be if he shoulder pressed what he does on incline barbell, or if he probably didn't just shoot all of his drugs in his shoulders, they wouldn't look that way.
Yeah,
Both
that's
are wrong, by the
something.
way. Neither are facts. Um, and then on the flip side, if I looked at you and said, "Dear God, like, could she just do bent over rear laterals the way I'm doing them, and I bet her rear delts would be better," like, as opposed to stepping back and be like, "Okay, these are both great sets of delts achieved at a very different approach, and neither one of them is wrong."
Yeah. Well, I think again, like if we're going to talk about how to be a good consumer, I think another good KPI on if you're consuming quality content is the conviction with which someone like yells from the mountain, you're right or wrong, I think is another kind of sign of immaturity. Like I think most people have been training for a really long time, and generally the best coaches will say that like, yeah, this is how I would approach it, but it's not to say that's the only right way to do it.
Right.
Um, and so that's probably another KPI that can be used to determine if the content you're consuming is something you should just like take at face value, or if you should kind of step back for a minute and go, okay, well, hang on, like start to think a little bit. And learning to think about the process, I think, is something that you and I really like to coach in our athletes because it's so important in the overall success. It cultivates a self-trust, and that self-trust is what lets people just follow the plan and not worry about things.
Oh yeah.
Again, I think about little Dave. Little Dave. It's another great example. Like, do you trust himself to just do and execute? Because he knows what you're after, he knows what it should feel like, and he just goes.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that coming out and saying, this is the only way, this person's an idiot, things like that. Those types of statements to me are a major red flag as a consumer to make me go, I'm not really sure about this. And this isn't just in bodybuilding. Like this is something that I look at with, I really love looking at neuroscience.
Right. Yeah.
So when I'm learning from other people, when I see a hook that is along those lines, I then step back. That's my cue to evaluate what's this person standing on, and are they preying on having that big emotion to kind of capture me, or is there data what should be capturing?
The amount of people who've pushed back on the way I like to structure legs, right? Which is start with hamstring curl, go to adductor, and then do quads and come back to hamstrings. They're like, that doesn't make sense. And I'm like, listen, I'm not so naive to know that there have been many giant sets of legs built not that way before me. And there's lots of people who will build big giant legs after me that don't do it that way. But I can also tell you this, anyone who's ever converted to that way, they're like, Chris, this feels incredible. I'm like,
They literally go, this is the way. And when they go away from it, they come back to it.
yeah, right. And there's a reason fucking for it is because it just it gets the body ready to do hard leg pressing, squatting, lunging, Bulgarian split squats. It opens everything up. It develops a leg to me that is well rounded top to bottom. And that means for me, hip to knee, front to back, all angles, as opposed to, unless in my mind, unless you do two separate leg days, it can't be as effective because if you crush your quads, nothing after quads is effective. You've completely lost,
Yeah,
not only in my mind, mental focus, but the ability to stabilize your pelvis probably as effectively as you need to do hamstrings or glutes.
absolutely. And I
Um,
think that's a good concept too to come into. If we take that concept of basically opening up, stabilizing, priming, kind of the whole system there, which I completely agree with, and we think about, okay, well, why does that work?
right.
Well, for legs, we know that we need high force production. Okay, well, what's going to promote high force production? Well, generally, when the nervous system senses that an area is stable, it's good to go. The brain gets a lot of like green lights. Yeah, we're going to get better force production, load more weight, better range of motion. There's a lot of good stuff that happens with that.
Yes.
That's especially important for large muscle groups where there's a high risk reward ratio, right?
Yes.
Could we take that same concept and then bring it into upper body, especially for people who maybe have some sort of shoulder history, or some sort of people have had a pec tear, things like that. And you've probably used those same concepts when you're
Yep.
structuring upper body sessions. I know I have for people. When people come to me with a rotator cuff tear, first thing I do is look at their structure. Are they wide or they narrow? And I build off of, okay, how do we get them open where they need to
Yep.
and stabilize where they need to so that then we can potentiate. Um, so that there's a reason these things work, right? And it always comes back to, can we identify the principles, and are those principles associated with what we know to be true on first principles? In this case,
Right.
absolutely.
Right. Because what's wild to me, and here's how I think about it. Let's say you ride your gym is 15 to 30 minutes away. You sit in a car, your hips get tight, and that's not to mention if you had to sit for work all day. And then you're
Yeah.
immediately going to go over and try to do a leg press or a hack squat or a back squat. Logically, does that
Oh,
make
man.
sense?
Back to my powerlifting days, so I'd be in the clinic from roughly 7 to 4. And if I
Yeah.
was able to get in a lunch break, and if I was able to get in water, which
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, between when I left my house at 6:15, 6:30 to when I actually left the clinic at 4:30,
Right.
I get in a liter of water and then I go in and try to deadlift or back
Oh, right.
squat.
Yeah.
Wow, bro, that was not wise. That's actually how I tore my adductor tendon.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, like I wish that I had taken into account all these things about like how about we just shuttle some things around first, like
Yeah.
prepare for the session. And this becomes more and more important. Again, if you're 25, you can kind of fuck off and it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But when
Agreed.
you're 35, 36, 37,
Yes.
that's where it really does start to actually matter.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that honestly, it kind of pisses me off when people come down on you because you are so far ahead of where they will ever be because you've been able to save the game so long. And
Right.
so, like, just as someone who really respects you,
Right.
pardon my French, it drives me fucking crazy when these guys who are 25, 26 come at you saying you don't know what you're doing and you watch them and they're complaining about being broken. I'm like, buddy, you got another thing coming. If you think you're going to hang on another 12, 13, 14 years,
Right.
best of luck to you. This is someone like Chris is who you need to be learning from if you want to love this
Right.
process.
And
So it
what's
gets
yeah,
bothered.
what's crazy is I speak to those people because I was once them.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, I guess no one wants to listen to the old guy in the corner screaming, right?
I do.
But it's always like, listen, bro, I get it. Like, you think the most you can go in there and put on the back squat and go is going to get you legs that look like mine. And yes, it might, but what are you going to break in the meantime?
Right.
And I
That's the
know that
real
because I'm
word.
broken because of it. Like,
Oh man, same,
yeah,
same. So I turn 37 next month. And I keep looking at these women who are in their, mid 20s, late 20s, doing things that they can get away with that I thought I could get away with. And now
yeah,
on the other side of that, I'm like, man, I wish I'd listened to Julia Anto, like she's been in it a minute. And I always think it's important to actually recognize that the people we are standing on people's shoulders, and there are people who have gone before us, and being able to actually put our pride away and learn from them is probably the way to stay in the game.
1000%. And I get it. Like, maybe you're on this exploration to almost prove it wrong, but I'm
I
telling
would.
you, there's a lot more people that are like me than are stubborn meatheads and are my age without serious injuries that hold them back or even prevent them from lifting anymore, period. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you and I started working together for like some low back issues and shit that I had, you're like, how much work and time and effort do you put into just keeping your lower back in a good spot? And I think we figured out it was something stupid like 12 hours a week.
It like so you know how you get your soul graded when you get that like 165-pound dude? It's like, Chris, you're doing it wrong. Israel's doing it wrong. I know it. And you're like, bro, my dog is more muscle than you. Like my um when I hear you talk about your back and how much time you put into it, that is how I feel.
Right.
Because there are so many ways, and it doesn't have to be passive. Like
Right.
I can't tell you the number of guys that I've worked with for back pain, knee pain, hip pain, where they think they need to do all these correctors and go get seen by their chiropractor and they need to go to the newbie. And I'm like, bro, let me take over your training. And I promise you, 12 weeks, you're going to wonder why you let that obsolete way of thinking dictate your decisions.
Right. Yeah.
But unfortunately, until we know what that looks like, it's really hard for us to see the light at the end of the tunnel and see our way out of that dark place.
Agreed. Agreed.
Oh, sorry. I get really hot and bothered when I hear about people thinking they can't do certain things. It's like,
Yeah. Rightfully so. Yeah. Especially when you know you have the answers to it. You're like, yo, I can help you solve that problem like really fast. So no, that's true.
yeah. Next time we train together, I would love to see you back squat
Okay. Yeah.
and see maybe pick that apart a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I know that's something you love and you haven't done in a minute.
I have no. I honestly can't remember. I don't know. I've done the bamboo bar, the most recent, or that Emax. Have you ever seen one of those?
Mhm.
Where you put it's like a bamboo bar that you put bands on and then dangle 25 from it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, I have seen that.
So
Wow.
I was able, John actually had me doing that relatively frequently. That thing is just so damn hard. You talking about stealing your soul. That is
Yeah. Man, John was so ahead of his time. And like I know he was really well connected. He talked to a lot of physicians and he talked to a lot of therapists and things like that. I physical therapists. I really, really wish that people understood how ahead of his time he was. Like
yeah,
that concept that he introduced with you with like that instability training is like not only a way to back squat, but there are a lot of secondary and tertiary things that are happening with that.
yeah,
Um, and now it's crazy because everything that he basically was like, this is just like the, simple solution. And it was never like he was coming down on you for like, oh, this is how you got to do it. It was like, hey, why don't we try this?
right,
Now you get people using those same ideas and they're doing it in a way to try to sound like high and mighty. And to me, it just like, really loses the spirit of like, let's move the needle forward together.
yeah,
But it's also really cool too, because I don't know anyone who trained with him and learned from him more than you. And yeah, I think the industry is really sorely missing that voice. And I love how much you potentially did that.
I something I always think about, right, is how much he is given this community and then me in particular. And
Mhm.
I always wonder, right? Because this year will be 4 years that
Wow.
he'll been gone, right? And I always think like as much as he gave, how much we have forgotten as a whole, like his impact, right?
Mhm.
Like I know the ones who are connected to him tightly, like me, like we'll always look at him like on a pedestal, and he'll always have a serious legacy and a piece of our life. But as a whole, right? Like, I, and I only say that because I saw a video of a guy ripping him off yesterday who did not give him credit for setting up a training session that you and I talked about last week with activation, explosive, pump, and stretch. And he acted like that was his original idea. And I was like this close to comment on it, and I was like, you're a dirtbag. You know where you learned that from. You can at least give him a shout out.
Yeah.
I took the high road because I didn't want to choose violence yesterday. Um,
That, that, wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it sucks, right? So, it makes me wonder, and I mean, this maybe might be a little bit too deep for this podcast, but I'm always like, man, a man who gave that much effort, energy, and time to all of us is so easily forgotten by
Mhm.
the masses, as opposed to the small fraction. And that carries like such serious weight, I think, in my decision-making process of how I move through life, you know? Um, so yeah, something to think about.
I mean, that's really, really big.
Yeah,
That's a big thing to be thinking about.
agreed. Agreed. All right, let's get an Axial loading
All
before I
right, Axial
get more
loading
angry. All
before
right,
I get too,
so yeah.
because
Yeah,
we haven't already, so
I know, right? I don't know.
casual
All right.
transition.
Yes. So we just talked about Dr. Mike. I'm gonna go back to him. So he posted this video of doing it's just line or reclined curls with dumbbells. And he felt like too many bodybuilders have far too much axial loading and that it actually impacts their ability to control and fire a muscle. And I would just love to hear your thorough thought process on that. And then I will just kind of piggyback off of that. So yeah, as a whole, do you think as a community, with all the people you see help work with, have watched train, do you think that should even be something we should waste time considering?
I just grabbed my notebook because I was gonna kind of like deconstruct this. This could be very easily like I could go off and do like a 20 or 30 minute like presentation just on this, but um if I ever even talk in the next 6 months, that's what we'll be on.
Yeah.
Um, with regards to axial loading, I think we need to first ask the question, what does axial loading do? And it
Oh yeah.
creates um just like on a neurological level, like what happens when we load axially? What does the brain do to create stability in the system? And generally, it's going to fire up muscles that are big muscles. They're like long. They're like stabilizers. They're loud. They're that kid that if you got a team of kids, they're that one kid that's always off, like doing something. You're like, Johnny, don't kick the other kids. Like
Right.
with coaching, right?
Yes.
And so that's a big part of what happens. Now, what that can do to create shape change through the rib cage, through the pelvis, that's another conversation. But we know that when those muscles get really loud, a couple of things happen. Number one, we reduce the ability to have relative motion between joints. That relative motion between joints, you could think about as if your body, so if the relative motion is bones' ability to move on each other. We need that and able to move well. So before we got on the call, you and I talked about being able to lengthen muscles so you can shorten it.
Yes.
Neurologically, with axial loading, we increase tone levels of muscles that generally create superficial tension and reduce the ability of things to move, right? That's why a lot of times you sit down on a cable row, you're gonna feel lat better than if you lock in on something really hard like a barbell row.
Right.
Does that
Yes.
make sense
Yes.
inherently? Just
Without a doubt.
wise.
Yeah.
So secondarily to that, there are some shape changes that happen throughout the rib cage and pelvis that you could think about that as almost a prolonged change secondary to overactivity of certain muscles. So the more active those muscles are, the more it's going to change the shape of our bodies. The reason that's important is that as the joint position changes, it will change the relative resting length of certain muscles through length and shorten ranges, which makes it harder to contract a muscle. If a
Right.
muscle is starting in a shortened position, it's going to be hard to get it even shorter, right?
Yes.
So that being said, do I think that we want to look at muscle groups, right?
Yes. Yes.
Something like a bicep curl, is it gonna be a bad thing if we stand to do a bicep curl versus if we absolutely load something like a barbell row, right?
Yeah, right.
Those are two different demands. And so do I
Agreed.
think that in general, there is a potential negative to too much axial loading? Absolutely. Just from an orthopedic and health standpoint, again, like I could go off for 20, 30 minutes on that, but it's different context. Something like a bicep curl on an incline, I think you and I talked about this last week, getting in that reclined position. If this rib cage can't move up, you're going to end up in a really hard position for that shoulder to actually feel
Yes.
muscle. So if we're trying to drive proprioception of muscle like a bicep curl, finding a position in which you can actually feel it is going to be more important. And if it's going to have less of a potential negative than something like, again, loading a heavy deadlift, as much as that was.
So what's interesting is your answer is the same as mine. It depends.
I
If
hope
I'm
that wasn't too long-winded. There's
no,
literally like there's so much I could have gone off.
that was perfect. And to me, that's the right amount of detail, right? Like and I'll start here. Someone asked me about it and they're like, Chris, what do you think? What about axial loading? I was like, my axial is really strong, bro. I don't have to worry about that shit.
Well, to be fair, your axial being too strong is part of the problem for your
Yes,
lower back because it's locked up your hip mobility. So
correct.
again, there's like risk reward. There's secondary and tertiary effects of everything.
1000%. And it's like you said, using your examples, I'm not stressed about doing standing dumbbell curls with 70 pounds total in my hands, meaning 35 on my right, 35 on my left, as opposed to if you and I were going to do heavy bent over barbell rows with 315. That's a
Mhm.
completely different conversation. Um, than, I mean, listen, because at the end of the day, if I felt that double arm dumbbell rows was going to grow my lats better, I wouldn't do them single one arm at a time. It's not effective. It's not efficient, right? But there's a reason I like the single arm dumbbell row over doing them two at once. It's for that reason, the bracing.
Yeah.
So that's how I've always thought about it is again, I think this is another concept that maybe people are getting just way too far in the weeds with.
Yeah.
And we should just take a deep breath and realize, like you said, where do curls feel the best to you? Is it in a cable? Is it in a dumbbell? Is it a barbell? Is it an easy bar? I can tell you this, if you put me back on an incline, like a 45-degree incline, and maybe do stretch curls, it feels terrible.
Yep.
Um, it doesn't feel good on my shoulders, and my biceps don't feel like they can fully lengthen like safely. Where if I did a cable stretch curl where I'm standing and leaning forward, it feels incredible.
We got off the call last week and like immediately we came onto this topic and I forget how it came up, but we were like, okay, well, what would be the better movement instead? And you and I both went to the same movement for that. It was like immediate, not even a question.
Yeah.
So I appreciate, like I appreciate that Dr. Mike went there because I do think it's worth asking.
Yes.
But I also want to bring up is kind of an idea that we think about every movement in training, if we think about the end goal of basically being able to train the longest, it's going to come down to how healthy can we keep our musculoskeletal system.
Yes. Yep.
Most movements are going to fall somewhere on I'm going to give it the name of like high exchange or high support, and we could think about that as risk reward.
Right.
And we always want to look to broaden out that gap. Because if we can tolerate a higher risk movement, that generally means that our body's probably going to be a little bit more durable.
Yes. Yep.
One of the ways we do that is as we push that forward, we also toss in some high reward movements or high support based movements. One of my favorite ones of those lately, just given that a lot of people are really limited in trunk rotation. I mean, we sit at our computer all day, we drive, we don't do things that get us rotating, especially in like our upper trunk, like T4 and kind of thing.
Yes.
One of my favorite ways to do that is a standing alternating bicep curl.
Right.
super low hanging fruit, like super low hanging fruit, but we don't realize how much relative motion is actually occurring in the upper portion of the spine. So in some ways, being overly cautious on some of our kind of more ancillary movements might actually rob us of some ways to recapture movement to allow us to do some of the dumber things in training that we love to do, like deadlift, even if they aren't necessarily like the best from a longevity standpoint.
Agreed. And I'll tell you how I came to that realization a long time ago is I saw one of the trainers that used to work under me, and they would take people who are extremely sedentary and make them do seated exercise all the time. And I just said to them one time, I was like, they sit all day at work, they sit at home. Have you ever thought about just getting them up and moving?
Like, how about some walking lunges? Oh,
Yeah,
wait.
no shit, right? Like support your body through space and then have to balance off of it. And it's like he never considered it. I was, it's if we're gonna do cardio to warm up, if you've been seated all day, why in the fuck are you gonna do a bike? Like, get on the treadmill or the elliptical or a stairmaster, and even if it's not at a fast pace, like just get moving through space, bro. And
Yeah,
that's something that always has kind of made sense to me. I'm not saying that I'm against seated exercise. I mean, shit, I do lots of seated exercise, but there's also a time and a place to me where it's like, we need to, there's some other things we need to consider or factor in for the totality of your training session that day.
yeah, yeah,
Everything, and I feel like I'm sure you may see this as well. I feel like we're almost in an era of hyper isolation where people are almost scared to say, oh, well, Chris, you should never back squat. You should hack squat because that's going to target your quads more. Okay, cool. But there's a lot of
mm,
benefit to squatting, like with a bar, right? The
yeah,
the one of the biggest things that I saw deteriorate on me when I stopped back squatting was my adductors. Like they lost that thick fullness to them, and I had to
yeah,
start doing the adductor machine. Before I'd ever given up back squats, I'd never needed to do adductors ever, not once. My adductors were always developed. Like they matched and flowed and fit with my legs. But when I stopped doing back squats and I solely focused on leg press, hack squat, and a lunge variation, my adductors took a hit, and I had to add that exercise into my training repertoire. So, what are your thoughts there? Do you think that?
I'm just sitting here. I had not thought about that, but that makes so much sense. And we could pick that apart a million different ways, right? Like your case study event of one. It would depend on how you're squatting and things like that. But yeah, I do think that now that I think about it, the hyper isolation, I'll talk about myself for upper body. I was just telling Dave the other day, when I trained for powerlifting and when I stopped training, this is like, gosh, probably 10, 12. Yeah, no, longer than that. God, I'm getting old. Probably 13, 14 years ago now, when I stopped training like, my intro level bodybuilding and actually said, I want to get strong. And I started training bench press, like heavy. That is when my upper body actually started to grow.
Yes.
And in pretty much every training cycle I've had where my upper body's actually grown, it's been by doing things that quote, like, shouldn't work from a pure isolation perspective, but probably had again a lot of other secondary and tertiary benefits, some of which I knew and some of which I didn't, and still wouldn't in hindsight. There's a lot going on that we're never going to know. But I think the hyper isolation is a big thing. There's a lot of good that comes from synchronicity. I would guess it has to do with synchronicity of motor units
Right. I agree.
in addition to loading pattern. Like obviously the loading pattern is going to put tension places, but there's got to be something else going on neurally that permits greater output through other movements.
This correlation may be completely coincidental, but when John and I really went down the route of getting my squat even better. So what I mean by that was we were on this rotation of where every other week we would do some sort of an explosive squat pattern, whether that be chains, bands, just fast bar speed, sub-maximal work. And then the next week or later in the week, I would squat for more optimal or
Yeah.
more efficient output where I'm really pushing hard, heavy sets to the end, or not necessarily to true failure, but until they were like really grinding reps. I always noticed that when my squat was going north, my scale went north and my muscle accrual for my entire body went north. Now, again, that could be complete happenstance or coincidence, but that's something that I noticed personally, like night and day. Like when we were adding plates to my
Yeah.
squat, my whole body was getting bigger and better. And
Yeah. That's something Dave and I were talking about the other day, actually, where with his powerlifting background, it's funny, powerliftings go through like they go through like a hypertrophy block where they think they're gonna add a bunch of size in like, 12 weeks. I'm like, bro, we spent all year doing this. Like, you're not gonna get jacked in 12 weeks.
right, yeah,
That's cute though. That's real
right,
cute.
yeah,
But Dave and I were talking about this the other day where he'd go through this like, hypertrophy block or whatever, and it was 4 week hypertrophy block.
yeah.
Um, whole other topic.
Right.
And he would come back to squats after, and he said he always felt like his quads blew up from it, which is counter what most people say. Most people say that you look at powerlifters, and most of them have like strong quads, thick chest, thick backs, things like that, but generally are lacking when it comes to leg development. And I think that by and large, that's true. So it's interesting that when you think about the hybridization of hitting both concurrently, obviously paying attention to things like fatigue levels, CNS fatigue, systemic stress, all of that.
Yep.
I think that concurrent movement is uh, probably the best course. And honestly, like that's when I feel my legs grew the most too. I had a block of training where I was getting ready for my first powerlifting meet back after tearing my adductor tendon and fracturing my pelvis, and then having all the seizures after. And my legs grew the best when I had 1 day per week that was more like straight output oriented, like, sets of 5 or less explosive.
Right.
Uh, and had another day of the week that was purely based on just, loading up that muscle for heavier, harder sets of anywhere from 10 to 30.
Yep. Yep. What's really interesting is that's what we always found. And this was my Saturday workout for a long time, is we would do uh submaximal leg curls. So it was just warming up. It was like 4 sets,
Yeah.
8 on leg curls. And he was like, don't go to the end, just get a pump in a hamstring, not a crazy pump like we would normally do on our base day. And then I want you to go squat. And every other time we would do that, it would be bar, chain, band. And that's how we go in rotation against the band, not reverse band.
Yeah.
And we would do sets of 5 to 6 with short rest periods, like 60 to 70-second rest periods. And then we would do 20-pound jumps until we lost bar speed. And then obviously as we did that, like you would get stronger, right? So if like week 1, we lost bar speed with 275 and against the red bands, like then you would start to notice like, okay, next week I got to 295 and then we get to 315. And then as that climbed, then we would always see correlation of when we went back to our hard day, like that suddenly felt lighter on your back because you were
Yeah.
ripping against the band or the chain, and you remove that shit and the weight would fly up. Like I saw so much leg progress just simply doing that. Like there was other factors at bay, but I always tell people like that really grew my legs really well. That or they always responded very well to high volume, high stimulus. Like
How did you know? And maybe you didn't, maybe it was like you pick a decision and you roll with it and hope it's the right one. And the best you can do is, best you can do. But did you have any KPIs that told you was an indication to switch? To go from like, maybe more high frequency, high volume to more what you and John were doing with kind of that cyclical overload.
it was kind of instinctual, if I'm being honest. Like
Yeah, I got you.
I could tell when I needed something different. Like because you would either kind of hit a ceiling on that a little bit, and you just for me, legs twice a week I actually loved. And then I started to realize that that might not be the best utilization of my time in the gym. I'm going to become
Was there a strong part for you so you enjoy doing them? Weird.
right. I know. And it's like, if I have any hope of balancing this fucking body out of mine, you should probably back off. So then I was like, okay, let's just drop legs in once a week. But then it was like, well, I still want to do hard shit because it's fun. And I think I just bounced back and forth between that, right? And then I
Yeah.
was like, oh, well, man, I really want to get my hamstrings close to his. So maybe I'll do a hamstring glute pump day and then still do a hard leg day.
Yep.
And then it's like, okay, cool. That blew my hamstrings out big time. Like I did that for a year and my hamstrings got to the point where they were one of my better body parts. And then I was like, okay, cool. Like, let's just drop down to a all around leg day. And then it was like, I really like doing that squatting rotation. Let's do that. So it's almost like I don't know if they would call that mental fatigue or you could just kind of sense when it was time for a change. I also was like hyper analytical with my photos, and I always, in my
Right.
mind, I always thought I need to just keep chipping away at like what I'm viewing as physical perfection for me. Um, so yeah,
I think that that concept of just kind of mentally knowing, um, we talked about this last week and we talked about it earlier today, and I'm going to come back to it, is that idea of self-trust. I think a lot of people do have that kind of gut visceral feel, and even if they're wrong, like,
right.
okay, let's act on it and see what happens, because all that's going to do is continue to cultivate a feeling in a sense of being able to move forward rather than like, I don't know what to do. Because that feeling frozen and not being able to make a pivot and not being able to make a decision is really, I think, what you and I are hoping people can change
Yes.
here within this culture.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
and so that, it's interesting that your answer to that was, I just kind of with my gut. I
Yep.
think most people, I think most people have a good gut feel and just don't know how to trust it.
Agreed. And I can say that that's always been a strong like attribute of
You're
mine.
really good at that.
I just
That's
I don't know if it's my kind of thought process of just not having regret in life, but it's just tied to I hate wasted moments or
mm,
opportunity. I hate it. Like there's nothing worse to me than sitting around and contemplating what I'm doing is wrong. And I'd rather just get on a piece of paper and use one of these fucking wooden ass pencils, right? And
I
just
love it you have that in front of you. That's awesome.
I have four fucking notebooks sitting right here, right? And they're all for something. And I always feel like, listen, if I feel like my wheels are spinning or if I feel like maybe there's something better out there, I just start writing shit down and attacking it. And guess when that starts? Not next week. It's today. If
Yeah.
it if I have back today and I'm like, you know what? Like I really need to work on opening that lad up more. Okay, cool. What am I going to do today? Let's start writing this shit down and just fucking try it. And then like, I don't know if I shared this with you. So I don't know if you can see it. This is 14 back exercises I wanted to fuck around with. I did
Yeah,
seven, I did seven of them last time. Six are good, one is bad.
I was just gonna pick this up. I have the same thing
Yeah,
where I literally just make random notes of things. And I think that's where, again, like the self-mastery, like people want to know how to love training. People want to know how to get progress. It's by doing this shit.
yeah, oh yeah.
It's by trying something and recognizing that there's no one that's been in your body. You, no matter how experienced your coach might be, you are always forging your own path because you're the only you that's ever existed.
Yes.
So having the confidence to like pick something and move forward on that is so big.
Here's a great example of that. You know, like within the last couple of years, people were really shitting on lying leg curls, and they're like, seated leg
I
curls are the
just
only
need it.
reason. Gotta do seated. Okay. I go to four different gyms. One doesn't have a seated leg curl. So what? I'm going to be paralyzed? No, fuck that. I'm doing lying. The next gym I go to, the seating leg curl is okay at best. It's okay. As I'm going to say, it's okay. What am I going to do? Oh yeah, the lying leg curl is right fucking there. Use it. It feels great. And then the final place I go, I only go there to use a seated leg curl.
Yeah.
And I always laugh and think to myself, how many people, because they see the fear mongering on Instagram or YouTube for the lying leg curl, would completely avoid the lying leg curl, which may actually be superior for them, or the machine is better than the access they have to a seated leg curl. Because not all seated leg curls are created equally.
Um,
And I'm thinking about in particular, there is a model of life fitness that is so fucking heavy at fully short and is so light in the lengthened. It's the exact opposite of what you truly want,
I
right? Like in what world would you ever want it to be the heaviest at the short and the weakest at the lengthened? That's never going to be a good setup. So if that's all you had access to from a seated leg curl perspective, why in the hell would if Life Fitness makes an incredible lying leg curl, which I'm a huge fan of, why wouldn't you do that? When you get on it, it feels great. When you get on it, you're pumped. You're stronger. You're getting better at it. But suddenly, because fill in the blank expert tells you seated is superior, you're going to throw it out the window and completely avoid all feedback from your body. Like that hurts my heart for you. So I'm like,
mhm.
trust yourself. Like, trust yourself. Don't don't take everything for gospel and think, oh, that's the truth. That is my truth. That is their truth. I need to tell the world. Sometimes it may not be the right. If you had access to a ham tractor, by all means, get on that bitch and wear it the fuck out.
Every day.
Yeah,
Every day you train legs, rather.
yeah.
Yeah.
But some of us out there don't have access to. I don't. If I did, I'd use it. It's that to me is probably the biggest take home message from everything here, right? Is even though someone more intelligent than you, more advanced than you may tell you something, don't completely avoid and throw away your natural instinct when you pick up a weight doing a certain exercise. If it feels right to you, it probably is right. And if it feels wrong, either you're doing it poorly, you don't have this supporting muscle to do it properly, or you need more practice, or you may need to throw it in the garbage. That's four different options I just gave you.
I completely agree. I think practice is the one that people miss out on, but have a time limit on that. Like if you give it 3 to 4 weeks and it still feels like garbage, don't spend the next 4 to 8 weeks trying to make it better.
Agreed. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm trying to think of an exercise to give like a hard example that I am just not a fan of. Oh, decline barbell pressing. I,
Funny, I love decline barbell pressing.
you listen to Dorian Yates, and he's going to tell you that's the keto chest. It feels like it's going to blow my fucking front delta off the bone. Where now, decline Smith machine feels good. Decline dumbbell feels the best. And then of all of them, decline hammer strength probably feels number one to me.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
feeling my lower chest and being able to load it and not worry about things hurting or popping off, right? Like, and that's for me though. And I only know that because I've done it for fucking years to I used to love decline when I was a kid. You know why? Because I could load it heavy as shit. That was, right? So that was an ego thing. But I'm like, are my pecs actually getting pumped off of this? The answer is no.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's
I think that's one kind of big takeaway too, is just knowing that whenever someone puts out there a solution, just knowing that particular, I don't even say audience, but the particular situation that speaks to. Because to you, your major concern is making sure you don't pop something off the bone, right?
yeah,
For me, it's do I have the stability to have the output? And so just I think recognizing again, like trusting yourself and knowing that whenever someone puts out the solution, that's the solution for a very specific point in time for a very specific given circumstance.
right. Yeah. Well, and I'm just if I were keeping on that decline thing, right? It's like I realize that pressing I'm very strong at and good at. And I realize grabbing weight and unracking it from back here with a heavy load probably isn't great
That.
for the shoulder, right? Like if I'm gonna have to pull 4 plates off that rack and I don't trust someone to spot me, what am I gonna have to how am I gonna have to contort my body to get it off the rack and then stable before I can press?
Right.
Like again, that may not be a problem for everyone. I'm not trying.
Most people are not gonna decline press 4 plates. Just thinking, Chris. I work with a lot of really strong dudes. I heard that and I was like, oh yeah, no, don't unrack that shit.
You know,
Your
I'll,
face. Please protect your face.
Right. Yeah. 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 I think sometimes like people will ask me things about like strength and stuff like that. Like, oh, Chris, like I think the most popular question is, what are some strength like metrics that you would consider before you're an advanced lifter? And someone asked me one time, they're like, would you consider like when you can finally press 225 on the bench press? Like, and I was like, absolutely not. I was like, I was pressing that shit in high school. I wasn't even close to advanced. And they were like, huh, I'm 35 and barely getting 225. I'm like, yeah, I was
Yeah,
16, bro. Like that's a real
yeah.
thing. Like,
I
yeah.
remember my first 225 pound press. That was fun. It felt really
You
good.
don't, yeah, see, all the men are crying in their sleep right now.
Yeah, that was a good time. I miss that. I really miss that.
Anything you have to wrap up? I know I said I promised questions, but it's been almost an hour. So
No, I think this is great. I hope people leave questions because there's a lot, I can spin off. And again, I just want to thank you for your time
yeah,
and
again.
for choosing to have me on here with you. I hope this is helpful for people and I don't get too nerdy.
The good news is we have 3 built up in the tank now, so I feel great. I'm gonna release the first one next week, so I'm excited for that. I always like to get like a little reserve to where in case you or I's schedule gets misaligned and I don't want to miss a week once we start
Yeah,
them. Uh,
yeah.
so no, I mean the biggest takeaway so far for me, and I hope that we're on the right path, is just reminding everyone that who is extremely solution oriented, which we both respect, that sometimes that ever has to be evolving and that there are
Yeah,
multiple ways to attack it. And just because your brain or body performs different than how you or I may describe doesn't mean you're wrong.
yeah, for
Yep.
sure.
And I think that's for me, at least the biggest thing. And as I'm been in this for so long, is it's not always a right and wrong.
Hmm.
It's the most feasible for you in your environment, in your life, in your section of growth. And sometimes it may be slightly less optimal, but more enjoyable. And that's the right balanced equation for you, right? Like,
100%.
I always think in my mind personally, if you said, Chris, like you have to go in the gym and every single session you have to leave 3 reps in the tank on every exercise, I would still probably go train because I need some physical outlet, but I wouldn't love it nearly as much as I do. Right. Like if they're like, oh, Chris, like go in there and just, you don't have to worry anything about pump. I want you to just train in the 5 to 6, 7 rep range and just move a lot of weight. And I'd be like, ugh, it doesn't
Yeah,
sound fun.
yeah, no, no, thank you.
Right.
How that
Um,
phase.
and I always go back to like, sometimes I think like what I'd have to load on a bar or a dumbbell or a machine to get 5 reps and be done with it, and what that would feel like on my joints and how I'd feel when I woke up the next morning. Um, and is that cost reward worth a percentage of more muscle than how I'm training now, where I wake up and feel good in a day? Like, and that has to be a very mature thought process, right?
Hmm.
Because I think people will hear, oh, well, if there's a more optimal way, wouldn't you do it? And I'm like, more optimal in terms of what, short term or long term progress? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
you know,
And is it going to detract from the rest of your quality of life?
correct.
I've got a guy that I've worked with for a long time where he started to hate training, not because he didn't enjoy training, but because he was in so much pain after that it detracted from the rest of his quality of life. But he was
Right.
doing everything he was told to do.
Yes.
So
Yep.
there's always that, that opportunity cost. And at some point, that's where I think we need to make pivots.
Agree. Because the number one way for me not to enjoy training is to have to train through negative pain. It
Yeah,
sucks.
it's not fun.
Or when you wake up in the morning, you're like, how in the fuck am I going to get out of bed? Or I can barely walk because I'm in so much agony, whether that be knee, hips, ankles, low back, fill in the blank. Like that shit sucks. No one wants to
Yeah.
feel that way. And
Right.
I think for so long, it older lifters almost wore that as a badge of honor. Like, oh man,
Mhm.
I'm just it's
Just
like
comes with it, like, getting
yep,
up there. And it's like, I'm sick of hearing that from people, especially
agreed.
someone who has the solutions. I'm like, you've got them too. We both have solutions. They look a little different. There's a lot of overlap. I'm so sick of hearing that from people.
Yeah.
If you want that, that's fine, but I'm not your coach
No,
because we're
fuck no.
not gonna let you stay there.
No, it's very similar to, I'll hear people or I'll see people that I've known for a long time and they're like, oh, I must be lucky to still be in good shape and things. And I'm like, it could be you, bro. Like
You
it
can
doesn't,
make the decisions.
it starts today if you want to. Like
Yeah.
you weren't tr I think that's the biggest thing, and that's all end. You aren't trapped in this body unless you want to be.
Hmm.
And the non-sexy side of that is it may take a lot longer to reverse out of it than you currently want to experience discomfort
Yeah.
for. So,
And I know we're kind of butting up on time here, but I do want to kind of just speak to that of not feeling like you are not trapped in that body if you want to be. Um, or if you don't want to be. Like again, coming from you've seen a little bit of this year for me. It's been really long, it's been really slow. And there were a lot of days where I did feel trapped, but I realized it was because I don't want to say I was putting some timeline on myself because it wasn't a timeline so much as it was an expectation. It was
right.
an expectation that I continue to look like a bodybuilder year round and that and granted, like this is a little bit of an extreme case. Um, you're only as trapped as the limitations and the expectations that you put on yourself. And a lot of those expectations, as soon as you take them off, you realize that there's a way forward. It's just a lot slower. Still a
Yep.
way forward. Do you want to go or not?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I relate to that so much because for the longest time, I would look at my photos and think, fuck, like I've been doing all of this for this many
Yeah.
years, and I'm still so far behind where I need to be. And then now that I'm getting closer to where it's like, oh shit, like, I was just telling Chaz we filmed a back session Tuesday, and it's like he was like, I was just watching you through space. He's like, the only area that isn't blown the fuck out is your lower lats. And I'm like, I know. I was like, I finally see it, right? He's like, your arms no longer a weakness. And that, I fought for that for the last 5 years. Like to think like 5 years to get,
5 years.
yeah, 5 years to get arms that I'm proud of.
Don't let people like skip over that 5 years. So if you try an arm day for 3 months and you're not where you want to be, like, come on now.
Right. And again, I know that my progress may be slower or faster than some. And I think that's what I always have to remember, right? Is Angela does a great job of honing that back into me. She's like,
Mm.
I know you see yourself, and it's like you want to be here, you want to be there. And she's like, you don't understand, like when you're zoomed out, even within the bodybuilding world, how many people would kill to look like you do currently, and yet you're so dissatisfied with certain things. And I'm like, yeah, no, I need to spend more time being grateful. I'm like, hey,
Yeah, that's a fine line.
yes, yeah, yeah. So, anyways, to wrap this up, attack today. It's Friday. It's an off day for me, so I just have to chill and work. But I get to do legs tomorrow, so that'll be good.
Right on.
All right. Until next time, Chris, Danny, we are done.